Good morning, 11 a.m. How are we? Good. Hey, thanks for spending your Sunday with us. My name is Bradley. For those who I haven't met, I'm our family engagement pastor. And what we're doing over the summer is we're going to start a little series that we're calling Road Trip. Has anyone in here been on a road trip of any kind? Been on a road trip before? Okay, most of us, right? At some point, you just have to face the inevitable and drive somewhere that's a long distance. Anyone take a road trip with kids? Can be even worse, right? We just took one actually to Atlanta, and one of our two is potty training, and so we had a few more stops than we normally have. But other than that, actually, it went pretty well. But I would be willing to guess that not all the road trips you've taken have gone super well. In fact, it's kind of one of those tropes of oftentimes road trips don't end up how we intended them to. Right? We have all the intentions in the world, we have all the planning in the world, we have all the prep in the world, but there's just something about a road trip that leaves so much room for chaos and so much room for the unknown and so much room for uncertainty. There's a lot of time, there's a lot of decisions that have to be made, there are checkpoints along the way, there's a lot that can just go wrong on the road. And so road trips don't always go as we had hoped they would turn out. And I think that's honestly why there are so many road trip movies. Have you noticed this? It's like almost every third movie that comes out in some way is a journey of a road trip. And there's a few reasons for that. One is that they're just entertaining. There's a lot of content you can create. But also, and you've probably noticed this, a lot of them parallel life, right? And they kind of show this overarching journey of your life that may be different than how you've set out for it to go. And so there's a lot of life lessons you can teach, and a lot of ways we can relate to them. And in fact, if you were to be honest, if you were to look at your life right now, some of you kind of feel like your life was a road trip movie. That this is not where you thought you would be. This is not where you set out to be. Maybe there were things that have happened along the way. And so you might even look at your life and think some of these things. You might go, like right now, you feel like everything in life started out well-meaning, but somewhere along the way, things escalated. And now you feel like you're dodging trouble everywhere you go, making increasingly more bold decisions, sort of like you're headed toward a cliff. Maybe that's just sort of how you feel in your life right now. Or maybe you feel like you've just been living in the fast lane. And now somewhere along the way, you realize that success isn't how fast you go or how much money you make, but in slowing down enough to focus on relationships and counting the metaphorical toothpicks on the floor. Maybe that's kind of where you feel like in life. Or maybe life started out, you just cared about being the shiniest and having the best, but then through a few unforeseen circumstances, you kind of lost what you thought would bring you happiness. And now you're trying to find the scenic route and rediscover your purpose. Maybe if you were to be honest, none of this life is what you thought it would be. You had a destination in mind, you had all the intention in the world, but over and over again, poor circumstances have been thrown your way into chaos, and now you're nowhere near where you thought you would be. You're out of gas, and you have a metaphorical dead ant that you picked up along the way. And of course, for many, if you were to be honest, you would just say, you know what, life would be so much easier if it weren't for all those out there trying to bite me and drag me down with them every single chance they get. Regardless of where we sit, I think that for most of us, if you've lived any amount of life, you can relate to some of these aspects, that there's some part of your life that didn't turn out quite how you thought it would. Maybe sometimes for the better, there have been ups, but maybe there are other times where you've lost something or something totally threw you for a loop and threw you off the path you thought you were going to be on. And maybe when you look at your life, there have been some things like maybe a decision that was made somewhere along the way that left you with regret or left you in a spot that you didn't want to be. Maybe it was a relationship that you lost, a relationship that ended up in a totally different direction than you had hoped. Maybe it's a diagnosis or something that totally threw you for a loop. Maybe there was an unforeseen circumstance that you couldn't even have prepared for or planned for, and yet it has completely put your life in a spot that you didn't think you would be in. And there's some in the room who, if you were to be honest, you wouldn't say this to your neighbor, and you would hesitate to say this at church especially, but somewhere deep down, you maybe are asking this question: is joy even possible in light of the journey I'm on? Is joy even possible? Because what I don't want to do over this series is we talk about this idea of finding joy in your journey. What I don't want to do is diminish anything that you're going through in the room. In fact, I get to hear your stories all the time, and I hear stories every single week that are heartbreaking and gut-wrenching. And as we spend the summer talking about joy, again, the last thing I want to do is diminish that. Because there may be real things you're walking through to go, I don't see how this is possible. So our hope isn't to diminish it, but our hope is to look at specifically one group of people in Scripture and see if there's anything that we can glean, any maybe tools we can partner with together and figure out to see, is it possible? Is it possible, given the ups and the downs and the curveballs we've been given in life, to still stay the course and to still make it through? And so specifically, over the next 4 weeks, we're going to look at a group of Christians living in the city of Philippi. And they were struggling with this same question. In fact, to give a lot of context behind where the group we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks, the group of Christians at Philippi were living just after the resurrection, okay? So Jesus had died, he had risen again, and news began to spread. And for a lot of reasons, I mean, for a lot of what we believe, that's good news, okay? The good news that was brought out of that is that finally God had done something about our plight. It wasn't about every other religion, every other culture said, work your way up to God, get clean enough, and then you can have a relationship with God. And yet what God did through Jesus was come down to us. To say, even though they can't do it on their own, I'm going to take the weight, I'm going to take the mistakes, I'm going to die in their place. I am going to set them new, make them whole. They are made in the image of God, and they will once again be made right with God. And so now, all people, regardless of where you fell culturally, regardless of where you fell in status, regardless of where you fell on how good you have been in the religious elite, now all people through Jesus can be made right with God. All people now have purpose. All people get to live with the reality and the presence of God with them through their life. He has a purpose and he has a plan. All of that incredibly good news living after the resurrection. But because of where they were at historically, and because of where they were at culturally, it also brought with it some things that were not good news. In fact, Jesus, his whole message was that he showed up claiming to be God. And so this upset the religious elite. This upset the government, the Roman government, who said, no, there are other gods and you have to worship them. In fact, one of those gods was the emperor. So to not worship the emperor and the government was to be a traitor in society. And so because Jesus showed up and said these things, he really just had a small following at the beginning. They weren't too worried. But as it grew, they saw this going in a direction they didn't want to go. And so they thought, what do you do with every other cult that you want to destroy? You just destroy the leader. And so that's what they set out to do. And so they did. They made it so public, and it later backfired on them, but they wanted to make it so public that they would hang him on a Roman cross in front of everyone to show that this guy claims to be God, and gods don't die, and he is definitely dead. And they thought, well, this will end it. Now surely this movement would quit. And they did for a season. In fact, for 3 days, there were no more believers. They thought, well, gods don't die, and so they ran and they hid scared, and they were worried about being next to being persecuted and having this movement completely stamped out. And so they just cashed it all in, gave up, no more Christ followers. But then something began to happen, and this is historically, something began to happen because hundreds of eyewitnesses who were scared and who were hiding ran back into the streets in the face of the government, the same people who killed Jesus, and said, kill me if you want, but we are so convinced we saw him again. And just like Jesus predicted that he would die and raise from the dead, he did that and we saw him. And so now we're just convinced, now we believe. And so there's a massive group now that were following after Jesus. And as people began to check in on stories and eyewitnesses would share their accounts, things that we later get in the Bible, but at the time were just being spread among people who were alive and who witnessed it happened. More and more people began to believe in Jesus. And this movement that they thought they were ending took off like never before. So now they're scared. And so now the Roman government, the religious elite, they make it their mission to stamp out anyone who would claim the name of Jesus. Anyone who would claim to be following after him or show any signs of following after him, those would be the ones that they would have to destroy. And so in the city of Philippi, it was actually a particularly strong Roman city, which meant that maybe more than ever, it was so dangerous to be a Christian because you weren't following their rules, you weren't worshiping their gods, you weren't worshiping their emperor, which was essential for Roman life. And so by following after Jesus, they would lose everything in Philippi. Family would desert you. Friends would not want to associate with you. If you had a business, you could not keep clients, so you would definitely lose your business, your reputation. And then you could even be tortured or thrown into prison or executed for your faith. And so it leaves Christ's followers in this incredibly tough place, where on one end, they have ultimate freedom and ultimate hope and a future like no other. They have forgiveness. They have a new outlook on life. They have a God who says, now you love one another, and it's not about power or might or who's worth all of those things. It's just love and care. They have all of this. And yet culturally, they're losing everything. And culturally, they're in a place where even though they have inward freedom, they have less outward freedom than ever before. It's not what they thought their journey would be like. It is not the place they thought they would end up on this side of the resurrection. And so you have these believers who are so convinced because we know it and we saw it, and yes, we're willing to die for it, but it is not easy, it is not comfortable, it is confusing, and we're honestly not sure where to go and how can we have joy given what we're walking through. And then you enter Paul. Paul starts out as one of those religious elites, and he made it his mission to destroy the name of Jesus, to ensure that it wouldn't make it in our history books. In fact, I had a college class one time, a secular college class. It was on history, and so we were talking about religion, how religion spread. And one day, the professor, I've always thought about this, she brought us in and she goes, okay, so today's gonna be kind of weird because what we're gonna do for the first half of the class is talk about how Christianity would have never made your history books. It was just like every other little following, every other little cult. In fact, it was almost gone. And then we're gonna talk about why it took over the world. And what's weird is, she said this, she goes, I'm not necessarily a Christian, but it is weird because the one who almost ended it and the one who helped it spread the most is the same guy. And she goes, I don't know, Christians believe, and this is what Paul would say. Paul would say, yes, he was dedicated to ending this movement. He didn't believe any of it. And then he too met Jesus after he died. This is Paul. He would say, I met him again, just like the other hundreds of eyewitnesses. And for Paul, and this is why it's so convincing to me, Paul didn't just kind of swap to a new life track. Paul gave up everything to do this. He lost all of his leadership. He lost all of his affluence. He lost all of his wealth. He lost all of his reputation. All of his family would leave him. His friends would desert him. His communities would turn their back on him. He lost absolutely everything to now become one of the people that he was hoping to torture and destroy. He becomes that. And so this guy, Paul, he begins to give everything because he was so convinced. So he would meet with the disciples and learn everything he could about Jesus. And then he would start helping these gatherings of people in these cities. Some of them were incredibly dangerous to even be a Christian, like Philippi. And he would begin to lead them and talk with them and work out what does it look like to live out this mission of Jesus, because we have to, and it's everything to us, in a place and a time where it is incredibly difficult. And so he would write these letters and correspondence. And what's really cool is that we get a lot of these letters in the New Testament. In fact, most of them are letters written by Paul to these churches and these groups that he was leading. And so we get to have them now to even compare them to our life and what the early Christians were learning and what that means for us today. And that's kind of what I want to do by looking at the book of Philippians. Because this is written by Paul to this group in Philippi who have lost everything, who are going through it, who feel like this is nothing what they signed up for. And in some ways, maybe there are some pieces of our story that intersect with theirs. And maybe there's something that Paul has to share to them that could also encourage us today. In fact, and this is what makes it even crazier, Paul himself was in a situation that he never saw coming. Paul, at the time of writing the letter to the Philippian church, was in a Roman prison. So he was being imprisoned for the same thing he was hoping to imprison others for. And he's writing in this Roman prison to the church of Philippi to say, hey, what I'm about to say, listen, I'm living it. And in fact, the prisons that he was in, these Roman prisons, they weren't like what we think of today. In fact, I brought a diagram of one of the most famous ones that many scholars believe some of the disciples spent time in. There are others that really followed the kind of the same pattern. A Roman prison was essentially a holding block underground. A cell holding block where they would just pack full of people and they would essentially leave them for dead until their trial was up or it was time for their execution, or worse, many didn't even survive this. And so they would essentially just leave people for dead, crowd them in underground. It just increased the isolation and what they're going through. And Paul is in this spot as he writes what we're about to read. And I just want to put all of that in context to go, can you imagine the Christ followers of this time going, this is not what we thought. In fact, our number one leader, he's in the same prison that we are probably on our way to. And what does this look like for us? And so I just want to warn you, what Paul says can almost be shocking and may even feel a little borderline offensive, okay? It would have to his readers. And here's what I mean. I'll just dive in. Here's what Paul says to them. Losing everything, he's in prison. Rejoice in the Lord always. That's his letter. Rejoice in the Lord. You've lost your friends, your family, you're being tortured. Rejoice in the Lord always. They're going, Paul, what do you mean by rejoice in the Lord? And here's what makes it even worse. To really break down what he's saying right here, rejoice simply means this. Feel great joy. You've lost your business, you've lost your family, you don't know what's next, you're facing imprisonment. Feel great joy, Philippi. They would have been going, okay, Paul, what are you saying? Like, do you not see where you're at? This is hopeless for us. This is not what we thought was going to take place. We don't see any change in the future. There's not like a hope of this turning around tomorrow. The Roman government is like the most powerful it's ever been. What do you mean feel great joy given what we're going through? And Paul, I love this. He doubles down. He goes, yeah, in fact, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Just doubles down on it. And two things I think we can see here that's really important for us. And just this one statement, two things I think we see. One is this term, I will say it again. There's not a great translation into English from what he meant, but it's essentially this idea of a continual return. In other words, I have to continually go back to this idea of rejoicing. I have to continually, circumstances will change, things will never be the same. You will over and over and over again for life have to keep saying it. Paul's saying, I will keep saying it. I will keep going back to it. I will never stop saying the answer in the midst of all of this, because it will continue to happen and things will not always go well. The answer will always be, will continually be feeling great joy. And I'm going to keep saying it. That the answer is rejoice. So that's one interesting thing we see. The other thing I think that we see here is, and don't miss this, he gives us the source of the joy. This is important. We kind of skip by it. Yes, obviously rejoice in the Lord, but rejoice in the Lord is such an important statement because he's saying to feel great joy in what? Not in what you're going through. I think that's sometimes where we get, especially as Christians, we get so down on ourselves is a polite way to say it, because we feel like, oh, I should just always feel happy. And even though horrible things are happening and hurts around me and my family's hurting and I'm like, I should just feel happy and that makes me a great Christian. And when I don't feel happy, I'm not a great Christian. And Paul's going, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that as a Christ follower, you walk into the world and you ignore her around you and you just pretend things don't exist and you just smile in the face of the worst things happening to you in life. He is not asking any of us to do that. In fact, it's the opposite. What he's saying here is that as a Christ follower, you get to put your joy in something else. You don't have to, because you see the pain in this world, because you see that all things are fleeting and things can be gone just as soon as you get them, and because the world is unstable, and because there is hurt and brokenness all around us, because you see that, move your joy somewhere else. Move the fact that you are finding great joy in stuff and things and what happens in your circumstances. You have to learn to move that. But Christian, here's the good news. You get to move it somewhere else. To in the Lord, who will never change and who will never be taken away and who can never move with the ups and downs of our circumstances in life. And so here's his point. I think you can say it this way. Joy is just more who than what. Joy is more who than what. And the reality is most of our world measures joy by the what? They do. In fact, we've probably fallen into this all the time. We measure our joy, our happiness by looking around us and seeing, what do I have? What am I missing out on? Counting up the things that I've got, my circumstances, my career, my money, my relationships, whatever, my physical health, all those things. And I'm gonna look at that and go, that determines how much joy I have. That's how most of the world works. The problem is, I think we could all probably agree, that doesn't always get us anywhere. In fact, it's kind of this losing game, because if what you're doing is looking at what you have and comparing it to everyone else's, then your happiness, your joy is all, your hope, your expectation, it's all dependent on what you have versus what everybody else has. And comparison in itself is such a losing game, because what you're doing is you're looking at everyone else's life and you're going, I want their finances, I want their house, I want their kitchen island, I want their car, I'd like their kids, I would like their body. And you go, okay, that's what I'm shooting for. And you wonder why you're never happy? You will never be happy. You will never find joy, because not only are you looking at the best of everyone else's life, you're shooting for something that nobody has. Nobody has the best of it all. I know that one influencer, but they're being paid for it. It's not even real, okay? No one has it. And yet, that's how the world finds its joy? And we wonder why we look around and people just, science has been showing us people are less and less happy, less and less satisfied. It's because they're putting it in what? And Paul, in the midst of these horrible circumstances, is going, but not so with you. You have a who. And you have a who that has spoken over you every label that the world is trying to throw on you, the opposite. He has spoken over you accepted and loved and forgiven. He has spoken over you made in my image for a purpose. You have a who that died in your place when you never could. You have a who that has saved you, who has redeemed you, who sees you as perfection because he sees his son. And you have a who will never remove his love for you, who will never falter in his action toward you, who will never back down from how much he fights for you and behind you and with you and loves you. Paul's going, Christ follower, you get to place it all in the who. That's why you have to rejoice. That's why you, unlike everyone else, can feel great joy, and you will have to keep going back to it, and you will have to keep reminding yourself, and you will have to, because the circumstances are continue to change. But your joy is not because of your circumstances. Your joy is above your circumstances, anchored to the one thing that can never falter or never change. So rejoice, feel great joy in the Lord. That was his answer. Now, I would be asking the question, and if you're practical like me, you probably would. That's great, Paul, but how? Right? Like, okay, that's against most of our defaults, just to feel joy given the circumstances that we're going through and to really place all of our hope there and on things. So what does this look like? And this is why I'm really excited for the next few weeks. And I would really encourage you, just shamelessly, I would come back, okay? I would come back next week, week 2, week 3, week 4, because that's what we're going to be talking about. Because it's great to say this and go outside and go, oh, we talked about joy today, so I'm just going to feel joyful for the rest of my life. It doesn't quite happen that way. And so I would say, actually hang with us, spend some time over these next few weeks, because we're gonna give you some tools, and not we, Paul's gonna give you some tools that I think are gonna be incredibly helpful to putting this into process into our everyday life. So not that we go, that one Sunday changed my life, but maybe we look back and go, that one summer did. And that one summer of locking arms with people and trying to figure this out really changed the way I experience joy. And so we're looking at a few very practical things. And so here's what Paul says next. I just love how practical he is. Really practical step. Here's what he says. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. And then the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So he's talking about what, honestly, I think we might even categorize as like an ideal life. He's going, you wanna have peace that transcends all understanding? A gentleness, a calmness, a confidence to walk through life. Like, that's the kind of life you want to live? He says that kind of outward production of your life, it actually starts with a very specific inward action. And that's what he's calling us to, is one of these kind of next steps we can take. He's saying it's a very inward action that's going to produce those things in your life. It's not by default. It doesn't just happen. It takes intentional action. And what he says it starts with is, what do we do when the negative, when the fears, when the worries, when the what ifs, when they hit? Because they're going to hit. I don't know if I've ever met anybody who went through life with no disappointments, like no regret, no negative thought ever come through their head. So that's a reality. That's what we live in. You will be disappointed. You will have things happen that you did not want to happen and that you did not expect to happen. And so Paul is saying, when you have fear, when you have anxiety, when you have these worries, what do you do with them? And he suggests that we do one thing that will lead to a totally different outward display of our lives. He says it's all about where you take it. It's all about where you take it. In fact, you might could say it like this: when horizontal circumstances hit, take them vertical. In other words, there's two options. Because circumstances are going to hit us, negative is going to be in our brain and our minds and our lives. When that hits, we have two options. We can take them horizontal, and we can vent about them, and we can post on Facebook about them. Just letting that one sit for a minute. We can complain, we can get retaliation against somebody. We can, for some of you, that's not even your issue, it's not even outward. You just store it and you ruminate on it and you try and shove it down. And for some of you, and I hear this story all the time, it breaks my heart. Some of you you don't know when the last time you slept was, because you're just ruminating on the what ifs and the worries and the fear. And you can take them horizontal. I think what Paul's suggesting here is what we now see is even backed up by science and by psychology, that's not healthy. It doesn't produce joy. It doesn't increase your relationships. And yet that's what most of the world does. And yet Paul is reminding them, here's how crazy this is. Paul is reminding them, you have a God who you can take this to vertically, who is there for you, who cares about you, who is big enough to handle it. Well, what I don't want to do this series, and I mean this, is diminish anything you're walking through. And so I don't want to begin to even understand. I hear stories all the time that completely break my heart. But I do know that God is bigger. And I do know that he can take it. And he can take your venting, and he can take your anger, and he can take your disappointment. And not only can he wants to, and I think he's the only thing that should take your anger and your venting. Instead of shoving it down and coming out at your coworker or your family, or just destroying your mind because it's the only thing we can ruminate on. And so Paul's going, you want to get to a place where you walk through life with peace and gentleness that just is above understanding. It starts with this: when negative circumstances hit, because they will, take them vertically. You have a God who's ready. You have a God who wants it. And so that's what we do with the negative. But then Paul doesn't end there, because he gives us something positive to do to replace those negatives. So here's where he goes next. I just love it. He just keeps getting more and more practical. So hopefully this will help. It says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely. He's trying to just list out these attributes of honestly who God is. Whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice. And the God of peace will be with you. Don't miss this. Paul is asking us to intentionally choose what we think about. Have you ever thought about that? I mean, how many thoughts go through our head a day, and what are they about? And he's saying, yes, okay, with negative ones, when they hit, offload them. Offload them to a God who is powerful enough to handle them, who wants to hear it from you, who wants to process them with you, and then who wants to take them and fight on your behalf when you never could, so that you can get some sleep. but then intentionally think about some positive things. Intentionally choose to. Maybe it's against every default in your bones. Some people are just maybe naturally wired better at this than others, but no one's perfect at it. He's saying you have to choose. And he's listing off these attributes of God. He's going, look around, Christ follower who has your anchor and source of the one who can actually bring joy. Think about that. Think about who he is. Think about where you see him in action. Think about what he's done for you. And if you begin to think on those things, and what would change? There's going to be this peace of God that's with you. And I think about this sometimes, like, what if Christians would just do this? I mean, honestly, there's a lot of great stuff in Scripture. What if you threw it all out and they just did this? Like, instead of complaining or posting on social media or just being negative all the time, if they just had 5 minutes of their day, if every Christ follower for 5 minutes of their day sat and thought about, what do I have? How has God blessed me? How does he love me? What does he see me like? Where do I see him moving in my life? For just 5 minutes a day, I think that would change the whole world, honestly. And Paul's going, that's what we've got to do. If you want to have joy, it's not in what's happening, because what's happening is not good. And what's happening is going to continue to change. And what's happening is going to have its ups and downs, and I myself am in prison in this moment. And who knows what the future holds. But what we can do, if we want to experience the type of life that Jesus has called us to, is we anchor our joy, our hope, our expectation in him and him alone. And we keep going back to it. And we take our worries to him. And we take our fears to him. And we take the uncertainties to him. And then we spend our time thinking about where he's moving and how he loves us and what he's put in front of us. And so I would just want to end with 3 questions. And I would write these down or take a picture, or they're actually in our app. You can go to the notes section and see these right there. But I want you to write these down, not because I want you to share these with somebody, because these are going to be pretty difficult if you want to share them. For some of you, that's great. Go for it. But for others, they're going to be pretty honest and pretty reflective. And I just want to say, I think you owe it to yourself to ask them. I think we owe it to ourselves to at least consider these questions, regardless of where we end up on the answer. And so here's the 3 questions. The first one, what is my source of joy? Maybe the most difficult one to ask ourselves, but if we hope to ever find it, I think it's important. Because we have to figure out, if is my source of joy tied to something that can go away in a moment? Is it tied to something that fluctuates with my paycheck? Is it tied to something that fluctuates with the comments I get on Instagram? Because if that is my source of joy, you might want to change it. So what's my source of joy? Here's the second question. Where am I taking my disappointments? Because we all take them somewhere. And for some of you, you take them to Twitter. And I know because I've seen you. I'm just kidding. You take them to that one person who you can always vent with, even though it's not necessarily healthy. You take them maybe not to a place, but you just hold on to them. And you think about them every night. And you can't move past the ruminating on some of them. Where do you take your disappointments? Because I think that's going to have a huge impact on the type of joy you find and the type of ways that you begin to offload and process through just your own mental health, honestly. And then I would do this, and again, I'm too practical sometimes, I get it. I would schedule in time to take my disappointments to God. Like, I would pick 5 minutes and just unload. Like, all of your disappointments, all of your regrets, all your frustrations, all the, yeah, but God, you didn't, and how could you, and where. I would take some time to do that. And here's what's gonna happen. You might not just everything won't be fixed the first time, you might not feel better, but it might stop it from coming out at somebody else. And you might begin to have, for the first time, some of you, an honest conversation with a God who can handle it. And you might even begin to start truly doing life with him honestly and openly. And start inviting him into your disappointments. And so I would schedule 5 minutes, vent it out. And the last question, What thoughts am I practicing? And it's interesting because the way Paul described that was as a practice. Because practicing is something you're going to do continually and over again. And the direction you're practicing is the direction that you're going to grow. And so some of you, the thoughts you have just been practicing every day over and over, they're heartbreaking. They're about your self-worth and how you see yourself and the labels that someone else has put on you, maybe even when you were a kid. And you practice those thoughts every single day. And I just want to encourage you. What if you practiced a different playlist? What if you practiced thinking on the fact that God has accepted you? That God has spoken over you as his child? That God has given you so much that we miss every single day. And what if we just began practicing thoughts, intentionally choosing to, it may not be default, but setting up some time, writing something somewhere, whatever this looks like for you, deciding I am not going to just be a slave to every thought that passes through my head and every negative label that I want to put on myself. I am going to decide to practice the thoughts of what God says about me, who he is, what he's done in my life, what he is going to continue to do in my life, how he will never let me down, never forsake me, never move, how I can anchor my hope to him. What if that was the thought we practice every single day? It would change everything. And so again, my last encouragement, and this is a shameless plug, but I mean it. Would you come back next week? And the next week? And let's do this together. Because I really, truly believe, this is what I've been praying for. Justin, who's gonna speak next week as well, this is what we've been talking about. I think this will be a summer that many will look back on and go, you know what? God did something big there. And the way I operate and the joy of my life changed. And that's my prayer. So can I just close by praying that over us? Let's bow our heads. God, I just thank you. I thank you for the hope that we have in Jesus. I thank you for the fact that you have redeemed us, that you have set us free, that we have ultimate hope and ultimate freedom. And God, I thank you that you never even said that this would be a carefree, easy world, and it hasn't been since the beginning. But that ultimately we can place our hope in what we know. We can place our hope in you that will never change, that will never let go. And God, I pray for the person right now who's just hearing you speak so clearly in the back of their head that it's not me, it's not coincidence, it's just you are speaking to them in this moment. Because their joy has been in something that's dragging them down or leaving them feeling lost or hopeless. And God, I just pray that you are reminding them how loved they are, how for them you are, and that they can begin to release it to you, and that you're fighting on their behalf. God, I pray that you would help us all begin to take those steps and grow closer to you. It's in your name I pray. Amen.